Welcome to Making the Deal, Frameworks for Transactions, the podcast focused on lower middle market transactions and how to bring them to close. I'm Shawn Racino.
And I'm Joe Allen.
I'm going to hop into our guest here today, David, but quick recap on our previous podcast, the types of buyers. Joe and I had a discussion on the different types of buyers, the variations of what they're looking for, and how they transact. And a big takeaway from that was engaging capable partners throughout that process. So if you have somebody advising you, somebody doing the documentation, your attorney advising you, whoever it may be, get them engaged. The tail end of that conversation, we had a good few comments about preparing to sell. And so often we're talking about some of the mechanics, but David's going to hop into this conversation with us, but focus on the journey before you sell.
Yeah, 100%. As Shawn said, we had really great engagement on some of the recent podcasts, specifically our ABL and AI focused podcasts. If you haven't listened to those, go back, give them a listen, leave some comments. I thought they were pretty great conversations. I've gotten great feedback from people. As always, please feel free to reach out to Shawn or I or our guests, and we will communicate that again today with our guest, David Hamilton. So let's jump into today's conversation. So as Shawn said, we've spent a lot of time talking about the minutia of the transaction. So we've talked about the purchase agreements, like we've talked about what's in your LOI. We've talked about like who's on your deal team, all that kind of stuff. What we haven't done is spend time is talking about the journey up till you're ready to go into that transaction. Sure. The planning that comes into that, the mindset that you have to go or get into in order to get to that transaction. So today we're going to be talking a lot about the journey before the sale, and also the fundamentals that create that opportunity for you to transact. So with that being said, I want to introduce David Hamilton with Kickpoint Ventures. We'll give him a minute here to introduce himself, but as a little bit of background on David, he's a senior advisor to McKinsey & Company and the founder of Kickpoint Ventures, an acceleration firm working with business owners in the middle market. As a partner at McKinsey & Company, David worked with many of the best Fortune 100 and mega fund private equity funds in the world and transformed hundreds of companies. He's a CEO of Kickpoint Ventures and spends all his time helping business owners maximize the value of their companies. David, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to see you guys. I'm here. Thanks for being on with us. I guess maybe kick us off with a little bit about your path and kind of the genesis of Kickpoint Ventures.
Yeah, sure. Started in August of 23, I think three things came together for me at that point in time. The first, which I've told both of you guys about, is I use the illustration of O.C. Tanner. O.C. Tanner is a company in Salt Lake City, Utah. I had led operational excellence globally at McKinsey, and I went there, and the hair on my arm stood up when I walked in the door. And I remember thinking to myself, man, like the way that humans treat people in a corporate environment, like I want to do that more. I want to create, and the best place to do that is in the lower middle market. So that was one, one of three reasons. The second was I had led community efforts as a partner in Detroit, and I met a woman, and she needed help, her strategy or talent or financials. We had, over 3 or 4 years, we had talked socially about many of these things, and finally said, you know what, she's going to be my first client. And if she's got those types of questions, I bet there's others that also have this issue. So that was one thing. It was nice to I guess jump out of McKinsey with 2 feet and have a place to land. And then the third was, Maureen and I, my wife, we kind of looked at each other and we said, do we want our kids to have fire in the eyes in life? Do we have fire in the eyes, and what's the best way to have fire in the eyes? And so we said, you know what, you got to go for it. You got to go build something. So here we are. I think back to the childhood. There's 3 or 4 images that all come together for me. One we talked about was backyard baseball. Like, loved being part of a team.
Sure.
Another was my mom was a special ed teacher in Hazel Park. and we'd go there on Wednesday nights and teach kids how to do, math and reading. And I'd leave there like thinking, man, I might have made a difference today. Might have given that kid a chance he might not otherwise have had. And then there was a hockey coach, Dave Brewer. I just saw him a couple months ago, and that guy bet on me. He made me the captain of his hockey team in first grade. I don't know why.
Yeah.
He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And so those three things kind of are that's what gives me energy every day. And that's what I'm trying to do with business owners.
Yeah, it's interesting how that theme kind of sticks in there, that it's all about like, yeah, I mean, almost like giving back based upon everything that you've now taken in through your consulting days, helping people achieve what people have helped you achieve.
You gotta figure out, at least, I'm learning, but what gives you energy?
Sure. Yep.
Those are the things that give me energy.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, let's put ourselves in the lens of the business owner. And I know often they feel stuck, right? They have advisors approaching them with concepts for a sale. I mean, maybe we can make the numbers look a little bit different. We'll kind of structurally engineer financially the numbers. And I think your firm brings a different scope to that. Can you maybe walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the point on, there's no shortage of content to consume these days,
Right.
and advisors no different. So I think our deeply held belief is like, it's got to start with the owner. And like you or I, every owner has a head, a heart, and a gut. And we like to spend a lot of time on mostly logical things. Like every advisor loves to give a business owner a bunch of advice on what they should do. But they're left with reconciling the emotions that come with their family members and their team members and customers they care about. And so, that's a little bit of how we love to approach things is first, what's the aspiration of the business owner? What do they feel? And what do they want more of in their lives? Then, of course, we get all kinds of questions about, like, so you said at the start, acceleration firm, Joe, that's my best way of describing what we do. Because people ask, like, are you an EUS coach?
Sure.
Are you a consultant? Are you private equity? Or, there's so many questions. And my answer is like, yes. If we're doing our jobs right, we're taking the best portions of all of that and integrating them on behalf of a business owner. We sometimes use the word like co-pilot. Like, can you stand along or sit alongside a business owner,
Right.
with those types of capabilities embedded, and be there to help support them in making better decisions. So it's not an easy thing to always describe. You kind of have to experience it at times, but those are some of the ideas that go through my mind on the kind of the gap we're trying to fill in the middle market.
Sure. And it's a different approach than I think some of the other ones you mentioned that are solely focused on that. You're kind of holistic.
Yeah, and we find many business owners like stuck between alternatives. They're asking themselves a question, like set of binary questions. Should I have rocks and milestones? Yes, it's a good idea. Should I sell or shouldn't I? Should I hire that person or shouldn't I? Should I enter this market or shouldn't I? And I think clarity emerges when you start to actually do the work on all of those things in a consistent way. I got a question. We were talking a little bit, and I think we're going to cover a little bit of it today on the leadership forum that we hosted a couple weeks ago. And coming out of that, I got a question from a good friend of mine and said, hey, like, what if you had to give a business owner what is the one thing that they should be focused on in a business? Like, what would you tell them? I said, well, actually, I don't know. But I do know like the process by which we can arrive at that answer.
Yeah, sure.
So that's a little bit, Shawn, how we approach it.
Let me ask you on that question. Do you find that like bringing that passion back? So you talk about the head, the heart, the gut, all that kind of stuff. I often find that the owners that we work with are way too much up here in their head. They've kind of lost the passion. They've lost that heart piece. And quite honestly, they don't follow their gut anymore because maybe they got burned once or twice and they've lost all that kind of stuff. Do you find kind of getting them out of their head and getting back to the heart and the gut, like trust trust your instincts and like get that passion, that fire burning again, because that's something that you oftentimes see as the next step.
Yeah, let me illustrate it. That maybe two different examples. Because I think it for sure, although we have a process that we like to work through, there is massive nuance in how you apply it appropriately. So there's a professional services company we're working with, where like talent is what they sell, they bring to market. And it's a $50 million company. I would call it a turnaround situation, but it's definitely a stabilization exercise.
Yep.
And so part of if we go in and we see that there's a culture that needs to be transformed in some way, a lot of where we'll spend time in the early innings is kind of unpacking that, like helping the owner self-discover and rediscover why they started the company in the first place. So I can remember sitting down with this guy very first, like, tell me your origin story.
Yeah, right.
Get them back there. Because if we can engage them in a way that they get excited about it, they can really, the passion starts to play through, then the rest is just execution.
Yeah, right. Sure.
Another example, we're in the process of there's a big residential services company we're in the process of buying. And these guys, they're pretty certain on why they're in it. But they do have some very acute, like they got to compress the cycle time.
Yeah.
The lead time of how long it takes to install. And investors are willing to pay more for that. So they don't want me to spend much time on the heart and the gut. They're like, dude, like, can you get me from here to here?
Yeah, right.
And so I think like the application of the playbook really depends on the circumstance. But at the right moment in time, those guys, just like the first guy, are going to get stuck.
Sure.
And you're going to have to bring them back to, the heart and the gut.
Yeah.
You just got to take judgment on when and where to apply it.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Kickpoint specifically and what makes a good partner company for you, because it is very much a partnership. So like, what is a company that you would typically say, like, that's a company I want to work with, we can add value up and down the chain, but I'll let you take it.
Yeah. Sure. I think there's three things that we look at the industry that folks are in. We look at the company itself, and then we look at the leadership. I mean, of all those things, I would say we can probably like to make a difference, like in any company. And the most important ingredient of all of that is who we're betting on, who we're betting with. And so we spend a lot of time asking ourselves, can we look the owner in the eye and some portion of the top team members, and do we see the fire? Do we think we can, there's someone we want to bet on? There's classic, industry things we look at is, are the tailwinds in the sector, are investors willing to pay more?
Yeah.
Do we think in the company that there's a differentiated product or service? Maybe it's not been fully realized. That's actually better for us. But if we do our jobs, we can help, the leadership team discover that more often and bring it to the market more often. And that's applied, of course, in like, five. So to maybe the characteristics, typically $500 to $200 million in revenue is where the disproportionate amount of our advisory and capital partnership activity sits. I think what we found in that range is there's a lot of companies that have something to offer, but they haven't yet professionalized fully how their organization is run. And so our toolkit makes a really, really big difference in that context. I think one learning as well from the last 18 months is like, $150 million company has some complexity embedded into it. $5 million does, but doesn't at the same relative. And so we've basically kept our playbook, if you will, in the process that we work a company through the same.
Yep.
All we do is kind of adjust our resourcing and the intensivity of how much time we spend with each portfolio company. And so, those are some of the characteristics. We love like residential services. I mentioned an example of that before. B2B services, and then distribution manufacturing. We want to believe that like we can diversify the revenue base. and that maybe some service related revenue can make a difference, in the economics of the company. So those are some of the things we think about.
Yeah. Look, it's been interesting. You and I met very early on in the Kickpoint Ventures experience, kind of developing what the company's future is. And it's been interesting just to watch you go, because I think when I first met you, you were looking at I don't remember if it was 30 or 50 million in revenue and up. And you very quickly realized that there was a value add that you could provide down the chain. And those companies had a lot of opportunity, and that you could help them get to where they want it to be. And look, we've walked through some stuff together, and I can see how you guys add that value. And when you talk about putting fire in somebody's eyes, I watched this guy put fire in somebody's eyes. I watched him sit in front of somebody and get them to say, look, my expectations are way too small. You really lit a fire under it. So
Well, you find, just in reacting to that, I know the situation you're referring to. I think the first or second time we meet with most business owners, one of two things is true. Either they've got really lofty goals.
Yeah.
And with one or two additional lines of questioning and probing, it's not all that clear on first impression that there's a plan.
Sure.
And there's clarity on how to get there. Or in the content, those are the even better if, you walk into a situation like the one you're referring to and you say, you know what, actually, you're worth more than that.
Yeah. Right.
Your bar is too low.
Yep.
So it's pretty easy. Of course, they don't have all the ammunition and the firepower and the capabilities internally to get there on their own, which is why we get excited about it. But man, that's a fun thing to do, is to raise somebody's aspirations.
Yeah, sure. You guys are the fuel on the fire.
Right.
So that was a really good look, seeing how you add that fire into people's eyes and give them those higher aspirations is, it's very important, because most people kind of just don't know how to get to where they want to be, or they don't understand where they can go. So that was super helpful. I think that's a good lead in to something that you actually had Shawn and I do when we were kind of talking through the podcast, right? And you explained how you go through this with owners to us, but the close your eyes exercise that you put clients through. It could be kind of a weird thing for us to do on a podcast. It takes a lot of trust for somebody to just close their eyes, go through it. But can you explain, do it here? My eyes, we need it. No, but can you walk us through that exercise? Because I think it's very powerful, and maybe the thought process behind it, what it really leads to.
Yeah. I mean, we were just covering off on some of this, right? This is about helping people discover their, what they're worth, what they're capable of. And so make no mistake, this is about making money.
Yep.
Value creation, we think about it, I mean, on both ends of the bookshelf. One is, how do you make more money today so that you can reinvest it in your growth? And the second is, how do you build something that's worth something someday? And of course, that's different time horizons and different aspirations, like we just discussed. But that's what it's about. And so I think the head, heart, and gut component of this, the easiest way I know how, is to say, look, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to go with me to the balcony of your business. We're sitting down over it, and you now have no bias. Zero. What if I asked you to think of your most prized employee, the one that gets away with cultural sin because they're good at what they do? What if I told you now is the time to fire them? Do the same thing for your most prized customer. Your team likely tells you all the time just what a headache they create, but for some reason you're hanging on. What if I told you now is the time to fire them too? Okay, now think of what gives you fire in the eyes. What gets you out of bed in the morning? What gives you energy in your life? What if I told you to stop doing everything else and just do those things? You see different reactions from owners, the parents. If I did my job right, you felt some heat rush to your face. Your breathing pattern might have changed. You might have rolled your eyes. This guy needs to get the hell out of here. But what I did was I allowed you to put yourself into an unbiased and feel the feelings associated with your business. Say, go back to that same balcony. This time, go with an investment banker or an investor that has zero emotion tied to what you've built. If I asked you those same questions, would you answer them any differently? The answer is always yes.
Right.
That's the paradox, that we find in ownership. And so from there, we then, we go down a path of, we think there's 3 specific questions that need to be answered to start to reconcile and integrate, one's answers to those questions. And so that's where we then pick up the conversation, is to say, look, if this is about getting clear from an unbiased way of seeing your business as a new way, then let's start to explore some of those places together.
Mm-hmm. It seems like a great opportunity for the business owner to kind of step back and look at it in a way that they haven't before. And you giving them that platform to do so, I think, is super valuable, because a lot of business owners, as we all know, are in the weeds, right? They're running their business, they're focusing on sales, maybe they're the engineer, maybe they're wearing all the hats. Just take a step back. It seems like it would be super beneficial for all owners to do that.
I think it's
Right.
the answer is yes.
Yeah. The other thing I think it does is allow you to kind of get away from the other influences. So, think about the team member that may be too close, your wife that may have poor husband, that may have an impact on the way you think about things.
Yeah.
Like, that is very, very personal. That's like your experience, your thoughts, your that kind of stuff. You're getting everything else out of the way kind of thing. So really powerful exercise.
Agreed. That's why we do it. The first one is like, find a lot of business owners that don't really know what investors are willing to pay for, right? They've been spending, to your point, like they're working in the business, not on the business. Yep. First question is like, what is your business worth? What's the value of it today, and what is it in the future? And I know, as it relates to the podcast today, this is like, there's a point in terms of looking to transact. Even better if that type of thinking that you have to go through at that moment in time is embedded into how you're running the company. So we spend a lot of time just, clarifying the current condition, and then kind of determining what the future aspiration of the owner is, and reconciling that with what's the market tell you about what you need to be doing to close the gap between those two things. The second big area is around how you're operating the company. And we look at 4 areas. One is strategy, second is talent, third is financials, and the fourth is operationals. If you take strategy as an example, if you go to the owner and you ask the question, like, do you have a strategy? The answer will inevitably be yes, of course.
Right.
Or any of those 4 questions. If you go to anyone else in the company and you say, do you have a strategy, and what is it, and how does it play out in your day-to-day, and how do you judge success based on it? What you start to see is there's typically some inconsistencies, right? And so a little bit of the provocation, the invitation for the owner is, okay, if we surveyed every team member in your company and you got to a 3 or a 4 in terms of the consistency of the answers to those questions on a 10-point scale, if you could move that from a 3 or a 4 to a 7 or 8, then you've got a foundation for continuous improvement and value creation. So that's the second piece, is the how. And then, the third piece is really the why. And we've touched a little bit about this, but like, who does your customer, or who does your business create value for? Why does it exist in the first place? And this is very, of course, person dependent. And it goes back to where we were talking about, but the origin story of,
Right.
Like, why'd you start this thing in the first place if it's a founder you're talking to? But reconciling like personal purpose with institutional purpose, and then allowing one's passion, to see yourself in kind of where you're taking the company. That's the third place we love to spend a lot of time with business owners.
If I can, I'd like to circle back on something you just brought up, and it's just about the teams within the teams, right? And how they all have a different vision. Look, we've talked about this before, because oftentimes when I'm working with clients, we do the same thing. We have to go through and talk to the different divisions, talk to sales, talk to engineering, talk to all these different people. you realize there's a big difference between what the owner thinks everybody thinks and what the individual teams like. We'll regularly see issues with, well, engineering doesn't agree with the way sales sold this, and sales are saying just design it the way that makes it the easiest, but engineering saying that doesn't work. And there's like a disconnect in the organizational values, how operations should go, who should be talking to. There's even a disconnect in kind of like how people think everybody ranks within like the value chain. You know what I mean? It is very interesting. So your point about those teams having a different kind of thought process in terms of like the consistency of who we are and what are we doing. How do you get them? Like, how do you get everybody on the same page in a situation like?
Um, it's a complex question, right? It's a slippery one because there's probably not a set of one size fits all answers, but I think there's like maybe an alternative way to think about it is how many assumptions do you have embedded into the way that you're executing? Like, and that's maybe the invitation for folks is to figure out where the assumptions exist and where can we minimize them, right? Because the opposite of that is like really good execution, minimizing your assumptions. So that's maybe that philosophy.
Yeah.
The way that we might think about like actually working it through is, I mean, you have to go get those perspectives and clarify how they're different and how they're the same.
Yep.
Between sales and engineering and production or whatever the different, sub silos are. And I think there's there's a little bit of art and science in how do you align people towards strategy and towards meaning. And so, the answer, if you go back to a little bit of the frame, if most of the answers to your question are like, do you have a strategy? Yes. Do you have operation? Do you have leading indicators? Yes. How well are they used? Like there's a lot of daylight to cover between a 2 or a 4 on a 10-point maturity, scale and a 6 or 7 or 8. And so I think that's the art of like, how do you pinpoint what the voice of multiple perspectives or multiple stakeholders is? And if you were to move it from a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or 4 to the same invitation. So I don't think it's a linear sport. I think it's quite it's nonlinear.
Yeah.
But it's about aligning the institution on the aspiration and then figuring out with a common set of things you look at, where might moving it up the maturity curve make the biggest impact in the shortest period of time.
Yeah. Just helping them see where they're out of alignment, maybe.
Yeah.
And then like you said, getting those assumptions out of the way.
Right. What's interesting, though, I'm sure you've crossed paths with a lot of companies in this space, that disconnect is masked by success.
Yeah.
Right. They've had some certain level of success. The owners identified, we're running a tight ship, we're making X amount of money, and they haven't felt the need to go through that process. But there's a lot more there, which goes to your point about the fire in the eyes. What if I told you this was in front of you, but they don't know it because it's kind of its status quo?
I think that's the scariest proposition there is, right? Because what they don't realize, and for where you said, Joe, when you get to transaction, that's going to be amassed,
Sure.
right? And you might give up what that owner might care about is today their current success,
Right?
but tomorrow they're going to care about their success just as much. And they're not taking the steps necessary to build quality into how the company's run.
Sure. Well, I guess let's toggle back, if we could, for a minute to Kickpoint and maybe walk us through what a partnership looks like.
Yeah. So, what kind of like outline maybe like those are two probably good flavors of how we differ. The example of the professional services company, and it's a little bit more of a turnaround situation. The residential services company that is like how do we take some of the magic of what we built and scale it rapidly. So there's kind of two ends of the spectrum, if you will. But the way that we would approach both of those is kind of the same. in that we'll spend a month or two up front looking at those 4 categories we talked about in depth on the current state and the future state and building alignment, with the owners and some of the top team members. You then quickly move to like, how do you make some tweaks to make it even more clear in line with a newly defined kind of future aspiration? How do we want to organize folks and what sub goals might we give them to be successful? And then from there, it's about building capabilities for better execution. And that looks different depending on the circumstance. We start that and, call it every partnership we start has at least kind of a couple years worth of work for the most part, because change doesn't happen, overnight. And so you're getting to call it months 4, 5, 6. You might be making some adjustments to the overall leadership team, but you're now past the point in time where better structure starts to make a difference. You've got to get into building deeper capabilities in some of the areas that matter most. So, one example is there's an organization that we're working with right now that it's a B2B sale, and they're trying to now sell with our help less of time and materials, more of a values-based pricing model, which requires a totally new conversation, with a client to actually get them excited. And you better have confidence in that sale, or else, you're not going to be able to sell it. And so that's one example, right, of, in the middle 4 months of the first year, we're spending time simulating what's that dialogue you want to have. What types of pricing models do you need to have that sit underneath that? And so, those 3 phases I articulated, pretty consistent.
True.
And, a year's worth of time, what you see is like, there's a little bit of us. We got to bring visibility in the first 4 months, got to build capabilities in the second 4 months. Then we got to step back in the third set of 4 months in that first year to let, the newly positioned leaders really lead in new ways.
Got to walk on their own 2 feet.
Yeah, right. Now, I think you mentioned it earlier in your intro. Is there kind of 2 silos within the company, one being a capital partnership? Can you walk us through maybe that?
Yeah, so there's actually 3 now, I think, since we last spoke. We basically, thing number 1 for us is, how do you bring, like we talked about earlier, the best of private equity, the best of like really good human-centric kind of support and partnership consulting. There's a bunch of things we're trying to mix to make accessible to the average business owner. So the model where we talked about and where I met you, Joe, of a performance-based consulting arrangement is still a very big part of what we're doing. So we'll set a baseline and we'll tie our compensation to the performance, how much impact we create together over the course of the partnership. That's thing number 1. Thing number 2, what that brought out for us was, wow, we'd love to own these companies too, in addition to advising them.
Yep.
And so we're now acting as an independent sponsor. And the residential services example is the first deal that we're finalizing. And then there's a third piece, which is consulting, like more fixed fee consulting. There's been a number of things that have crossed our desks in the last year, upmarket, call it 50 to 200. There's a company that's 1.5 billion. There's a company that's 3.4 billion. Now we're not looking to do that. That's not a huge portion of what we're looking to do, but it is an interesting set of issues to stay relevant upmarket and have some learnings to bring back to the other two pieces. So this fixed fee consulting piece, particularly in 25 and 26, I think is a big area for us as companies learn, the ambiguity of what is my strategy? How do I evolve it? This is stuff that we've made careers on. And so that's the third piece.
I like that you guys are staying active out there, because look, what you're doing in terms of bringing like big firm consulting experience down to the lower end of the market, I think people have kind of toyed with it in the past, but I'm not sure people have really figured out how to do it effectively. And I think your business model is very effective for that, because you figure out how to bring the value without having to charge the rates that you have to bring. And it, especially on the performance-based stuff like that, you just don't see that very, we're showing you that we're going to excel. You got to give us your commitment that you're actually going to do what we suggest. But I think that's super unique. And look, your continued involvement upstream, I think, is only a value add for your partners downstream. Okay, so one thing that I see be a very major issue, and I'm sure you see it with your clients or banking, Shawn, but just all the time is they're always complaining about talent. And it's across the board. It goes from somebody working on the shop floor up to sales, up to the very top of the chain. Whether it's their CFO, their COO, whatever it may be, they're always trying to fill the talent gap. How do you guys go about addressing, and when do you see it as an issue? Because you mentioned earlier, you guys are always looking at, potentially changing the team around, all that stuff. So maybe a little bit on how you guys address the talent gap or lack thereof in some cases.
Yes, maybe a philosophy point, and then so on the philosophy, see a lot of these binary questions, right? And I think the invitation is, how do you think about maybe several factors at once in the context of a talent problem that you're trying to solve? I mean, there are leadership dynamics involved. There are roles and responsibilities dynamics involved. There is, do you have clarity in the aspiration, the strategy of the company involved? There are, what are the key, skill sets that are going to make the biggest difference involved? So there's just a long list. The way that we sort it out is by, you can't think your way into acting differently. You got to act your way into acting differently.
Yeah, right.
So, as we think about setting up that second phase, we're very thoughtful on who are you going to bet on to own new portions of the work. And you find three things. So I'll give you, an example is, call it 6 or 7 members of a leadership team that we recently worked with. And we helped set the aspiration. We walked out of the first phase, and then we put folks into slightly nuanced and new forms of responsibility. And, probably 10 weeks later, you had 1 or 2 that had actually opted out. They said, this isn't for me in terms of higher levels of performance. And so what the owner concluded was actually, I'd always asked myself that question. Is this a really capable person, but are they willing to put in the work? And she had her answer.
Yeah.
Right. You let it go another, 8-10 weeks. And we knew that there was a fundamental, we were watching, will the incumbent leader be able to keep up with a new level of transparency and pace? And he wasn't. Right. And so then the owner had a great, the answer to that question too. And for the rest, it goes back to that capability point we're saying is are you super, super clear on the types of roles that you need that are going to make the biggest impact for your organization? And are you investing the time to build the necessary skills? And of course, outside looking in, it's easier to identify some of those things and bring the right expertise than if you're just trying to do it, with your existing set of leaders. So I think it's a long-winded way to get back to, we love to, in every partnership, kind of just work the process. And then, of course, there will be bespoke talent needs along the way. But for each, kind of building awareness of what are the environmental factors that might, allow you to choose one thing or another in that particular, example.
Yeah. And that team does make the business owner feel that, to what we just saw, kind of stuck in a position where they don't know where to go because they don't have the succession plan in front of them, or they don't know how to locate the people appropriately. I'm sure the way in which you guys are kind of organically going through the whole thing. I mean, there's kind of a sigh that comes out of them at some point. And it's like, oh yeah,
I always wanted to vow it. Yeah.
Yeah. not as bad as I thought it was.
Well, it's like, I think it's like, I was just on the phone earlier today with a business owner, and there's all kinds of questions around like, are we getting enough out of our current marketing capability in the firm we're partnering with? And I think we could go, the three of us, and try to answer that question. Or we could redirect that energy and we could say, now, how do you want to grow? Like, let's clarify. Are we super clear on the markets and the channels that we want to grow within? And what capabilities do we believe are necessary to actually go win in those areas? And so what you often find is you spend a lot of time asking yourself a question on the current relationship, when really, if you redirect the energy and said, like, you may or may not need that type of capability in the future state anyways. So I think, redirecting the energy to say a little bit more, what's the outcome we're shooting for? And then what capabilities do we need to get there, allows us to help the owner cut through some of these landmines that they're going to go, sink a ton of time into.
Yeah, start at the answer and work your way back. Right?
Sure.
Okay, so speaking of providing answers, so you referenced this earlier that you guys have recently got into what I call kind of an educational and soul searching leadership.
Yeah, maybe you should go as I probably need it, huh?
But the leadership forum, the Kickpoint leadership forum that you guys have recently got into, and I think you're coming out of your first one with your second one on its heels, and know that you guys are looking forward to doing more of these. But can you provide a little bit of insight into what you're doing at the leadership forum? And then on top of that, you're also including like what I refer to as the trusted advisor group, the people that they go to when they need an answer to something. Can you tell us a little bit why you're including the trusted advisor group in it as well? Because I think, again, it goes back to that partnership idea, and I think it's very important too.
Yeah. So, maybe this is news here. This is a public announcement, but we will have an advisor forum. Okay. In addition to the Kickpoint Leadership Forum, I love that. So, because I think
Keep an eye out for my invite.
there you go. You'll be on the list. But, advisors are human too.
Yeah.
And this whole head, heart, and gut, if you can't get yourself centered and why you're doing what you're doing, then how can you possibly add value for some of the business owners, to your full potential? So that's the simple answer on the advisor thing is see all kinds of people that are middle career, earlier career, later career that, no surprise, just like a business owner, are searching for meaning in their lives. And so if we can play a small role in helping them discover that, like that's pretty cool. We'd love to be a part of that. Goes to the same through line that we talked about in terms of the origin of what we're doing. Kickpoint Leadership Forum. The concept's simple, really. It's, can you bring business owners together and create an environment where they can be vulnerable and can be themselves and can get unbiased advice? We talked about bring them to the balcony of their life and their business. Mm-hmm. And so the way that we've been doing that, and I learned some of these tricks from what I've done, what I did historically is, first create an environment over dinner where you tell your origin story. Like, Joe, who are you? Like, where'd you grow up? What was meaningful? You close your eyes and say, like, bring me the images. There you go. Close your eyes again. Bring me some of the images of like the most meaningful inflection points that, made you who you are today and positioned you to be where you are and to lead in whatever way you choose to lead from here.
Yeah.
Open that up. I think what you always find is like, you worked hard to get owners to that dinner and they're kind of rolling their eyes coming in. And by the second or third story, they're like, oh, wow. Yeah. Like I could learn something from this.
Yeah. Right.
So that's like that's the first part. And then the second part on, we spend the full day on the second day unpacking 4 topics. 1, your legacy. 2nd, your life. 3rd, your leadership. And 4th, your business. And so some of what we've talked about here in terms of the 3 questions we ask in the business, we do it in kind of a peer group and a broader, plenary type of setting. My favorite part is, we'll say, hey, Joe, why don't you give us 5 minutes on your business? And then make an ask of the group. And we'll say, hey, Joe, no, you don't have to close your eyes, but at least turn your chair around. And we're going to talk about you as if you're not in the room. And I think that is some of the, that's such a gift, right? In terms of the different vantage points. People are thinking about your business as deeply as you have for all these years. You got 20 minutes for them just to debate. Like, what do I see in Joe? What are some of the questions I'd have if I were sitting in his chair? So pretty cool. Last, a couple weeks ago when we had this for the first time, we had 2 guys. One that's really stood out. One walked away and said, "You know what? I got what I need. It's time. Like, I'm making a call on the transition of my business." He's been contemplating this for a long time. The other, he said he almost teared up and said, "You know what? This has changed my life." And I think it was like some of those. I haven't asked him, but what I've inferred is like it was that turn your chair exercise, where he's been feeling the weight of the world in different parts of his life, and helped him bring clarity. So I don't know. It was good enough to like want to do it 10 more times this year.
Yeah. Put a little bit more fire in your eyes, huh?
Yeah. I mean, if I could do that, 3, 4, 5 more times this year, it'd be a great year.
Yeah. No, look, I think it's a great value add for owners. I mean, how many owners do you know that are just stuck in like the rat race and don't know how to get away from?
Absolutely. And I think as you get more of these under your belt, you're able to go to market and say there's a lot of value in this for that business owner who might not be quickly apt to take the time to focus on themselves when they're hearing others in the marketplace who have and have had positive results, and might further encourage them to take that time.
Yeah. And look, Pure Share, I feel like is a really great way for people to get, referring back to what I said earlier, get away from like those too close influences. Like, how do other people see you? Not how does your wife or your husband see you? Not how does your COO or your CFO or the people on the floor like that are looking for you for guidance sometimes. Not how are they seeing you? How does the rest of the world see you? And is it maybe holding you back? Is there something specifically that's pushing you forward? I would take it that's the kind of insights that people are getting out of this.
Well, and it's relatable because, like, if no one else can truly understand their unique vantage point, the closest thing possible is other owners that have to wrestle with those same set of circumstances in different ways.
And is having the same emotions, because let's be honest, there's a ton of emotions attached to all that stuff that keeps you out there, right?
Right.
Cool. Well, look, get me on that list for the advisors forum because I want in.
Yeah. Be interested to hear kind of the feedback as you grow too. And have you noticed, like, obviously the first one, is there a certain level of industry that impacts their willingness to open up? Or I guess kind of, have you noticed anything different by industry? I'll ask that.
Yeah. So, let me take you out of this environment. And so we used to do a ton of these for Fortune, 100 CEOs when I was at McKinsey. And you'd fight that same fight. Like, I run a global insurance company. What could I possibly learn from a mining company where it's in South America, not in New York City? Right? And again, by the time you're telling your origin story over dinner, right, people start to say, oh my God, this is more human than anything else. Sorry. And so, no, I think there's, I'd have to think about what are the 4 or 5 different insights, for maybe there's one on like the life cycle of ownership. Some are building versus some are closing.
Sure.
There's some are growing versus some are stabilizing. And so there are some some are really distracted with personal issues. There's a pretty tough circumstance that one of the owners went through, and, that's occupied. That's life.
Sure.
And so what was amazing about that personal circumstance is there was another person in the room that had faced nearly similarly the same thing. And basically I said, look, my hope for this business owner is the following. And it had everything to do with his learnings for how he worked through the same type of thing in his life.
Yeah.
So I think that's the through line.
Yeah.
Like it's a human through line.
Sure.
Yeah. Get people to stop defining themselves by their business and back to who they actually are as people, right?
Yeah. When yeah.
Even though it all comes full circle back to that, right?
Right. There's a business owner that was asked questions on. There's a couple of these owners in the room that have much smaller businesses.
Mm-hmm.
What can I possibly learn from them? And it was just amazing to see them interact, and they were good buddies and calling each other up. And actually, one of them's in another market, and it's actually the market that guy wants to enter. There we go. And so there's all kinds of these these opportunities. And it goes to your point, just create the forum, where people can exchange. If they take one or two things out, it's a good day.
Is there a follow-up mechanism where look, to your point, somebody's crying, all these people are learning from one another. Right? Is there a connector? Let's figure out how to keep this group together because you are getting so close, even though it's over a relatively short period of time. It's very easy to make a connection that you want to keep going for.
Yeah. We've asked them.
Yeah.
And I think what we've heard so far is, can you help us stay connected in some way?
Yeah.
So we're not, I think we're going to wait and kind of figure out what are the types of ways that people want to stay connected that they can't do on their own.
Sure. Yeah.
But man, first thing by the time Saturday came around for a Friday event, we had got an email saying, hey, can you give me those guys' contact? We're Saturday, right? That's great. That's a good thing. His energy's there.
Exhausting from your perspective, kind of shepherding this both at the dinner and then a full day event. I imagine you had to unplug a little bit. Obviously, you're familiar with the process. It sounds like having gone through it a bunch of times, but I guess how's David coming out of that kind of forum?
Oh man, if I could do that 300, maybe 300 days a year.
Yeah.
That's what I do, man.
Okay. It energizes you rather than draws you.
Yeah, it's that same Hazel Park, Michigan feeling of that the environment you helped to create might have helped someone break through in their lives.
Yeah.
And so you're on all day and you're exhausted, but man, there's a level of fulfillment.
Sure. Yeah.
It's what I hope for when I started this thing 18 months ago.
That's awesome.
That's exciting. Well, we'll definitely keep our ears and eyes open for feedback
and advisor
invitations.
Invitations, right? So hear somebody on the street be like, who's Kickpoint guy?
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe as we kind of wrap things up a little bit. So we've talked about a lot of different counterintuitive things over the course of this conversation. Could you maybe bullet point a few key takeaways, maybe 3 takeaways or, however many you think are appropriate as we summarize kind of the conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first one you just, mentioned, this binary set of questions, there's a chance to take it from binary to an integrated way of working through one's issues in your life and in your business. So that's my first invitation is if you're asking yourself a set of binary questions, figure out who and how to get to the balcony, right, of your business. And whether it's Kickpoint Leadership Forum or some other way that you kind of get perspectives, get up there, right? You could probably need to challenge your own thinking. That's maybe invitation number 1. I think, Joe, you asked the question around teams and different silos of an organization. I think from an owner's perspective, what needs to be clear is there's variability built into any company. And so the better grasp you can get on the consistency of how you're doing certain things in your strategy, in your financials, in your talent, your operations, the more informed you'll be to say, hey, do I need help in some way? And when I go to position this thing for transition, whether it's a fifth generation owner handing that down or it's someone that wants to get out, you're going to have those, some of those answers embedded into the company, sooner rather than later. So that's the second, John. I think there's a third that's like, this is not something you do in preparation for exit. This is something you do in terms of how you run a good business to begin with. And so if there are perspectives from the Joes of the world on what makes for great sale of business, why aren't you embedding that into your strategy from the start? So that's maybe the third invitation is, don't make this something separate from your day job, embed it into your day job. And then the last one is, Bob Marsh, Impact 11, great friend. And he taught me the importance of this, head, heart, and gut. And he does it. Impact 11 is like in communicating and public speaking. How do you relate to your audience? I think the same is true in running a business. And so that's maybe the third is, when you're sitting up there on the balcony of your business, can you bring clarity to what you're feeling versus what your gut is telling you versus, what you're thinking? There's space for all of those, but it's kind of integrating those that's going to help you break through.
And those, I think, funnel into what you talked about earlier is the what creates value in your business, how hopefully your business is improving every day, and then going through that process allows them to improve it. And then the why, right? Why are you doing it? And who are you creating value for? So I think that was a great way to kind of encapsulate our conversation.
Shawn, no Joe's here, but you have a formal invitation to the Kickpoint Advisor Forum. He's one of these.
One of the area excited. I quit. Will there be more of these pens there? You could be. Because I'd come for that reason alone.
You can come, Joe.
Yay. Well, thank you for the time today. Joe and I are kind of looping in a new kind of segment to the podcast to kind of talk about the hot things of the week, top of mind. I don't know if obviously we covered a lot of strong content here. Is there anything, Joe, that is on top of your mind this week?
Look, I mean, obviously the tariffs are the hot topic. By the time this comes out, we might be 3 weeks behind, but China's 10% tariff just went in effect today. Trump has froze the tariffs on Canada and Mexico because they decided to get in line and strengthen the border. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of works out. I'm sure as you're going through some of these meetings with your clients, especially if they're in the manufacturing space, I mean, the metals prices, like that's going to be a significant one, the 25% tariff. So I don't know if you guys have ideas of how that's going to impact, but I think that in the short term, that's going to be a real struggle.
Factor of the unknown. We'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah. Are any of your clients right now affected by that?
Yeah, working through it. I think the invitation that I give them, and maybe I'm a one-trick pony, is like everything we just talked about. Like, if you've got that clarity, it should make how you respond in these ambiguous environments that much more certain. And so I'm not going to weigh my hands at every issue because it really depends on the business, but do the work on your strategy on these things. And you should then, be in a position where you can capitalize on whatever comes down the way.
Yeah. Don't let the emotion overtake, right? Because a lot of people are going to be wide-eyed here for a while.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think it's going to be a factor, it appears, of this administration for the next 4 years. It's going to be a tool for them.
It'll be interesting. Well, okay. Now, one other thing we like to do to wrap up, David, which I think is turning into a pretty fun little thing, is we get a lot of different responses on this one. Not too many repeats, actually. But we usually try and wrap up with our guests coming forward with a location that they like for some kind of business interaction. So this could be coffee with a referral source in the morning, could be lunch where you're talking about a transaction, or look, a dinner place where you're having, or cocktails to celebrate a successful day. Joe pays. Hey, come on, I'm getting stuck with Bill too much here. But no, is there a spot that you like to go to that's like your...
When you said that, the image that came to mind was Canal.
Okay. right on Eaton over there in Birmingham.
That one, I think there's one in Farmington Hills. There's one in Detroit.
Yep.
Been all three.
Great bake.
So this is a baked goods coffee shop. Sounds like a place I need to visit. I haven't been there yet.
Yeah, maybe you can take me there.
Perfect. Shawnee Bays.
Got to get that buttery chocolate croissant, dude.
Yeah, out of control. Well, it's a good one that we have not had before, so thanks for adding that one to the list.
Yeah. So we want to thank you for being on, David.
Yeah.
We do suggest anybody who has enjoyed this content, please reach out directly to David. Reach out to us. We can connect you with David or his fantastic team over at Kickpoint there, because it's not just you. You have some absolute killers over there. Like, they're really impressed with the talent you've put together. Not just only on a professional level, but on a personal level. Like, they're good people, and that says a lot about. We all want to do business with people that we actually genuinely like. So, as of that, let's wrap this thing up. We just want to say thank you for joining us on Making the Deal Frameworks for Transactions. I'm Joe Allen.
I'm Shawn Racino.
This is David Hamilton. Thanks for joining us.